Imagine for a second you get a letter from someone in prison. They're waiting for a trial that could literally be a death sentence. You'd probably expect it to be full of fear, maybe despair, right? Well, there's this one letter written from a Roman jail, and its main theme from start to finish is joy.
I mean, really, let's put ourselves in those shoes. You're under house arrest, you are physically chained to a guard 24/7. Your future is completely up in the air. If you were going to write a letter right then, what would you even say? What would the tone be?
Well, this one man, a guy named Paul, wrote a letter, and he chose joy. And not just, a happy feeling that comes and goes, but this deep, resilient kind of joy. So the big question is, how is that even possible? To figure that out, we actually have to go to the city this letter was sent to. Okay, so our story really starts in this super strategic Roman city called Philippi. And believe me, understanding this city's unique identity is the first real key to unlocking the whole message of the letter.
Philippi's power was all about location, location, location. You can see it sat right on the main east-west highway, the Ignatian Way. But even more important, it was built in the only major gap in a massive mountain range. This made it the literal gateway between Asia and Europe. If you controlled Philippi, you controlled everything and everyone that moved between them.
And because it was so strategic, this place was a constant battleground. I mean, it was founded by Philip of Macedon, later conquered by the Romans, and it was the actual stage for some of the empire's biggest, most decisive civil wars. This was a city just soaked in military history and Roman power.
And then, after a major victory there, things got really interesting. The Emperor Augustus made Philippi a full-on Roman colony. Now that was a huge deal. It meant its citizens had all the rights and privileges of someone living in Italy itself. It basically became a mini Rome, and its people were fiercely proud of that Roman identity.
But inside this proud Roman military town, a very different kind of colony was about to get its start. So let's meet the people this letter was actually written for.
You see, the beginnings of this community were, they were incredibly humble. There weren't even enough Jewish men to form a proper synagogue, so it all started with a women's prayer meeting down by a river. The first person to join was a successful businesswoman named Lydia, and the first man? A Roman civil servant, a jailer.
And the story just unfolds so fast. Paul and his friend Silas show up, they meet Lydia, and she opens her whole home to them. But then, after they cause a bit of a public disturbance, they get thrown in prison. And that very night, bam, an earthquake rocks the prison, throwing all the doors open. The jailer is terrified about to take his own life, but instead, he and his entire family end up joining this new little movement.
And out of all this drama, this incredibly tight bond was formed. In fact, out of all the communities Paul ever started, the Philippians were the only ones who consistently sent him financial support for his work. Their connection was just different. It was deep and it was personal.
And that financial support, that's what brings us to the letter itself. Years have passed. Paul is now under house arrest in Rome, and that bond is about to be put into action in a big way.
So when the community back in Philippi heard Paul was imprisoned, they didn't just send their thoughts and prayers. No, they collected a gift of money and sent one of their own, a man named Epaphroditus, on the dangerous 800-mile journey to Rome. And he wasn't just a delivery guy. He was sent to be a caregiver, to cook and clean and look after Paul while he was locked up.
Now, to describe this kind of relationship, Paul uses this incredibly powerful Greek word koinonia. We often translate it as fellowship, but honestly, our modern idea of fellowship, a friendly chat over tea, it doesn't even come close to what this word meant back then.
Koinonia was not a social club. It was the actual term for a business partnership. If the business goes bankrupt, everyone goes bankrupt together. Or, an even more intense image, it was used to describe conjoined twins who shared a single bloodstream. What happens to one absolutely happens to the other. That is koinonia. They were truly in it together.
But here's the thing. This letter wasn't just a simple thank you note. Epaphroditus had brought bad news that this deep partnership in Philippi was being threatened by pride and some internal arguments. So Paul offers a pretty radical cure.
He puts this beautiful poem, or maybe it was an early hymn, right into the heart of his letter. And the first part is all about descent. It describes Christ, who had all the privilege in the universe, choosing to give it all up, to make himself nothing, to become a servant, to humble himself all the way to a humiliating death.
And then comes the second part of the poem, which is all about ascent. It says, because of that ultimate act of self-giving, therefore, he was exalted to the very highest place. The path down was actually the path up.
And this wasn't just some abstract theology lesson. No way. This was intensely practical advice. Paul was essentially saying, hey, you want to fix your disunity? You want to get back to real partnership? Adopt this mindset. Stop fighting for status and instead choose to put the interests of other people before your own. That is the path to true koinonia.
Okay, so finally we come back around to the thank you note part of the letter. And this is where Paul reveals this amazing secret, one that's kind of hidden in plain sight in one of the most famous verses in the entire book.
You have definitely seen this verse somewhere, on posters and locker rooms, pretty much everywhere. It's often used as this all-purpose motivational slogan, right, for achieving great things. But what was Paul actually talking about when he wrote it?
Well, get this. He wasn't talking about miracles or superpowers. He was talking about money. The immediate context of this super famous line is his response to their financial gift. It was about his own personal financial discipline.
So when Paul said, I can do all things, he was really saying, I have learned the secret to being content. Whether I have a lot of money or whether I have very little, I have found the strength to manage my finances and live within my means. For him, getting into debt was basically a form of stealing, so he had disciplined himself to be content no matter what his bank account looked like.
So what was the source of this strength? How could he find joy in a prison cell and contentment with any income? Well, this number offers a massive clue. In this one short letter, 132 times, Paul describes his identity as being in Christ or in the Lord. His sense of self, his stability, his joy, it wasn't based on his circumstances at all. It was based on being part of something much, much bigger.
Which leaves us with this final thought. If true koinonia, that true partnership, means being so bound to something that you rise and fall together, what are you bound to? What is it that defines your identity, your joy, and your contentment, no matter what's going on around you?